Hey all, and welcome back. Today I'm going to try and recreate a traditional paint mixing experience in Artrage. If you follow my channel for a while, you know I come from an oil painting and acrylic painting background. Those are my oil paint and acrylic painting setups. And you can see what I'm doing now is adding a new scrap. The idea here is that I want to play with paint mixing in a way that's more like traditional paint. And I do not like the way that color picking works in any software. I don't like digital color picking at all. I want it to work like real paint. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to set up my palette, which is like a titanium white, lemon yellow, cad yellow light, like a cad red, medium, cad, and then alizarin crimson here, kind of fudging the color a little bit, just trying to eyeball it. This looks a little brown, need a little more intensity there, but that's okay. We'll get some French ultramarine and also some cerulean. That's my favorite for my cool blue. Basically, my palette in oil paints is to have a warm and cool of each primary plus titanium white and sap green, and there's pretty much what you've got there. Kind of fudge the alizarin crimson a little bit better. That feels about, yeah, I like that better. Let's remove our references from the oil and acrylic setups for inspiration. And now on this palette, I'm working with, I want to show you this. So I'm using a scrap. A scrap is like its own unique little setup. And what's weird about it is it has its own undo and redo button. So you can see up at the top of the software, you have undo and redo for Artrage. And then inside the scrap, it's its own little surface. You have undo and redo there. And you can see that I took my lemon yellow and my alizarin crimson, mix them together, and you get a real traditional, it looks just like what happens with real paint. And then just beside it, I can set up my, my two cad yellow and cad red, and it looks just like real paint. This is what happens when I mix acrylic and oils together. I get colors that look pretty similar to this. So this is a really promising start. The only challenge is Control Z doesn't work inside of the scrap. It kind of has its own control system for undo, redo, and for painting. It also seems to have a little bit of an odd behavior with interpreting brush size. So here it seems to be working really, really well. Like I put down a mark on my canvas, I go over to my scrap, put down a mark there. It all seems to work. But other times I've tried it, it didn't. And I can't really figure out what the glitch is. I might need to talk to the software guys, but let's take a break from that and see if we can do our little sketch. Basically, we're just going to draw the hat of the cowboy, get his nose, back of his head, chin and jawline, get the torso, front of the torso, arms, just kind of blocking everything in a real crude manner. It doesn't really matter the drawing, because today is really about testing this color mixing practice, seeing if we can make it work. So far so good. The scrap is interesting. I tried making the canvas I'm using a smooth canvas, like as smooth as possible. Oh, did you see that? Did you see it? That's what I was talking about. Sometimes like the brush size gets really tiny and it makes it hard to use. So I'm going to use a palette knife to mix those colors together. I'm mixing basically the shirt color, the shadow color of the shirt, and it seems to be a pretty good mix. I like it. Let's try color sampling from our mix. Yeah, seems to match pretty well. So we're going to lay in, adds a little more stiffness to my brush since I'm working on a very slick surface. That texture of the stiffness of the brush gives that nice like oil bristle feel. So there I have kind of a sloshed together mix for some of my darker values, which I can sample from any bit of that pile of color, adding a little bit more of the warm tones for the shadow on the horse, a little bit more of the cool tones for the shadow on the shirt, and it works pretty well. The only thing so far that I can say is that sometimes the brush size translation between the scrap and the canvas is a little weird. Also, I noticed that the paint, it gets a little dried out. Like it's hard to get the paint to like really flow sometimes on the scrap. Like you can see as I'm mixing it, it's like I'm mixing dry media instead of that wet, luscious media of oil. And so I just don't quite understand how the software is interpreting the moisture content on the scrap versus the canvas. The canvas seems to work great. Like Artrage oil painting is as buttery as real oils, real life oils. So that's never a problem. It's just something about the scrap that just doesn't quite work as well in interpreting that. And the other thing is that brush size. Like I have this big old 267% brush on my canvas, and I take it over to the scrap, and it's like this itty bitty pencil liner, which makes it really hard to mix color when you can't get color off of your brush, you know? So I just think that's something to figure out. But you can see that the color mixing is pretty accurate. Like I'm able to use the real color mixing. And if you haven't enabled that in Artrage, you go down to the bottom corner, click on the active color in the color wheel down in the corner. And then you have this like option, if you right click it, you can bring up real color mixing. And I did that and it works. I mean, the colors mixing together are realistic. They're believable. It's just like if I was using real oil paint. So in this video, it's more of like a proof of concept. And I kind of want to work out the bugs almost live so I can show you the different ways in which this can work. But you can see that I'm getting a great representation of the colors in the reference image just using the scrap. I'm just having a little bit of a hard time because I can't get the brush to be big enough for the paint media to be kind of wet enough to work like I want it to. Typically, like if you have a palette, you're either mixing on like a palette paper, which is like a real waxy, smooth surface that the paint is literally like slip and sliding across, right? Especially buttery oil paints on that waxy surface. It's just, they mix and mix and mix and mix. They don't absorb into the paper. They flow and mix and super easy to mix. And you want that because you don't want all that color mixing to just get stuck on the palette. You want to be able to scrape it off there, get 100% of that paint off there and onto your canvas. Well, with the scrap here, it doesn't work like a real palette. It almost does. It's just that there's a little weirdness with brush size and there's a little weirdness with moisture. It just kind of dries out and then the brush is too small a lot of the time. So there are some glitches to it, but it is workable. I'm showing you so far that like, even though it's a little cumbersome and you can see it's like not mixing as well and it's like hard to get the paint to be wet on the scrap, it still works. But this video is, like I said, it's like the hypothesis being tested live. We're going to have to try a couple other strategies. I can already tell this is not going to be my happiest, thing, because it's just taking way too much effort to get the brush to be the brush size, to be the brush wetness, to do the thing, so taking a break from that concept, I can see we're going to need to look in a different direction here soon. I do like it. I still think it's, a work in progress. I think that it absolutely is tantalizing. I think it's the thing I've been reluctant to, solve, but I need to. Yeah, I need to solve that. Oh, and here, look at this. See how wet and chunky and like buttery this paint is when I take it to the actual canvas? But when I go over to the scrap, I can't get that wet butteriness to like happen. And so it's like, it's almost like the scrap is working against me in terms of the mixing. So it's not really doing its job. And so that's obviously very frustrating, but I think it's tantalizing in the sense that like it almost works, like it's so close. And so we just have to, I think we're going to have to try some different strategies. I do love like the big oil tube that you can actually squeeze the globby paint out. Like everything about it works except it's just not fluid enough, and that's not okay. So here's my other theory. What if I take my canvas and I just extend it. So like say I'm going to paint a 12 by 16, but I make it like a 12 by 18. And in that sense, like I have this like 2-inch chunk on the side of the canvas and I open up a view. So basically in references, you can open a reference, importing a reference image. You can open a scrap, which is like a little mixing palette and that sort of works, like a normal palette. Or option three is you can open a view. So this is really useful in the sense that you can open up a secondary view of your canvas that's like a zoomed out little thumbnail. So you kind of can read compositional choices and stuff like far away and up close at the same time. So this is important. Like as a gallery artist, you walk into the gallery, you want your painting to look good from far away, you want it to look good from up close. And with this little references view, you can do that. You can literally see the canvas from 2 vantage points at the same time. That is awesome, but it's also awesome because in this case, what I can do is I can set up the little corner of my paint canvas as like a palette, and I can use my view as something I just zoom into. As you saw me do, you can zoom and pan and zoom and pan and just get kind of like focused in on just that little chunk of the window. And so, yeah, at the end of the painting, basically all you do is just crop that part out and you're good to go. But what's sweet is that you can literally have this hovering little view of the canvas. You know, we could even rotate it sideways or whatever, and it would still function like this. And what's great here is that the paint is actually going to mix, and all the same properties will be exactly identical between the view of the canvas and the canvas itself because it's the exact same surface. So I like this strategy better. I feel like it works better already. I think that, you know, maybe what you might want to do is just use like palette knife with loading turned on for any time you're using the mixing, and then when you're painting, just use your brush. So that way you can kind of have your brushes set for the right sizes for what you're trying to do. And then you just bounce between those two tools, palette knife for mixing, brush for painting. And I think this could be the solution. I think this for right now is the answer. And I'm going to go for it and make, maybe not right now, but I'm going to go for it. This painting is more of like a, you know, a test, like a test project, like just sometimes I want to hypothesize almost and don't pre-plan anything. I just like, ooh, I wonder if this works. And I want to record it because number one, I'm super busy and I don't have time to like pre-plan and record all my scripts and everything like that. So sometimes I just want to do more like live painting, you know, and just kind of like fumble my way through it. And, that said, I think this works really well for that kind of no plan, just like I got a wild hair, I want to try it. I think this works. But I'm going to refine this down a little bit. I'm going to turn it into kind of like a perfect repeatable process, and I'm going to do a few paintings using this technique. And for those of us digital artists who come from a traditional art background, hopefully it'll kind of like wet our whistle for doing a lot more digital painting. Now, one of the things I keep thinking about though is that while this works and while it's, you know, a pretty good approximation, what I think would be better, obviously, is if here we have references and you have that little button for for import reference, and you have one for the scrap and one for the view. What if you had a fourth little button? So you make the 3 little buttons more square instead of rectangular, and that fourth button is a palette. And on the palette, you get this really slick glass-like, you know, waxy surface that is representative of a real palette. And you get like little inkwells or little rectangular little dishes like you would for a watercolor palette, and you just, you know, glob some paint in there, but you get like a real palette option. So that would be amazing. The scrap kind of works. The new view definitely works. But I think that having a dedicated palette button is the answer. And if you did that, you could import like plein air palettes or Richard Schmidt's Alla Prima palette, or you could have all these cool custom palettes that people get to share with each other. Here's my Zorn palette. Here's my modified Zorn palette. Here's this. Here's that. Here's my portrait palette here's my nocturne palette. Here's this. And you kind of keep playing around, and it could be a really fun way to build community, share out cool ideas. And I think it could all work really, really well. It's just that what we have now is close and it does work, but it's not perfect. And there's no reason for it not to be perfect because everything in the software is already there. Like we don't need anything except that dedicated palette option for mixing. And then another thing, like if I'm going dream big, like engineering team, are you listening? What I would want to add is like a little right there, like in the corner, like a little corner of my palette. I'd like to have a little dish, little like circular dish of transparent liquid that would sort of suggest like it's turpentine. And then you could mix turpentine into the color that you made and get this like really drippy version. Like that's one thing that's missing from the oil paints. I guess there might be 2 things missing from the oil paints. One would be just a little more randomness, especially for the end, like the beginning and end point of the strokes, having a little more variety there so that it doesn't look like the same thing every time. That would be more organic and naturalistic. The other thing would be turpentine, so where you can use really loose wet paint. Now here you can see I've turned the palette, my like view or palette, sideways, and I love this because now it's not taking up so much screen space. It's hiding that little swatch of the canvas that I'm using as my hidden palette, and I turn it sideways so it just works perfectly. This is it. I'm going to use this for my next couple Artrage paintings, and I'm excited to share with you how that goes. But the proof is in the pudding. Like you can see that the color mixing is working. It's accurate. It's representative and analogous to traditional paint, and I'm pumped about it. So just yeah, it works with different tools, not just the oil brushes, works on my custom brushes and everything. So all that is good. All that is awesome. Thank you for checking this out. Also, Patreon members, for those of you that are supporting, I have a set of Procreate brushes I've been making. I do use Procreate once in a while too. I'm going to put those on my Patreon. I owe you guys. And I have a bunch of videos coming out. So I want you guys to be ready. Check out the channel. Don't get lost. Cool collaborations, cool special projects, awesome promotions, giveaways, everything coming really soon. Thank you so much, guys, and take care.